would work with the attending and consulting all children's medical staff to definitively rule out whether this child actually ever had RSD or CRPS. And from your review of the records, that never happened.
Okay, welcome everybody. Please be seated. Members of the jury, I want to confirm while you were on lunch break, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves, you did no investigation, and you received no information. Is that all correct? Correct. Are you going to get tired of me asking you that question all the time? Can't tell you the number of times I've said that to any number of juries. Plaintiff, your next witness.
We call Dr. Tashana Duncan.
Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Now you're gonna walk around and have a seat in that stand. Thank you.
You may inquire.
Good afternoon. Would you please state your full name for the record?
It is Tashana, T-A-S-H-A-W-N-A.
And have you been called here this afternoon to testify to the psychological evaluations you did of each of the Kowalski family members, Jack, Beata, Maya, and Kyle?
Yes.
Before we explore your evaluations, will you please briefly describe your education as it relates to the field of psychology?
I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of Florida. I'm a licensed school psychologist, and I attended the University of Florida to obtain all my degrees.
And what is the highest degree you've obtained?
A PhD.
And what was your PhD? What was the focus of study?
Psychology.
How long have you been practicing in the field of psychology?
I don't have my CV in front of me, but I believe that I got licensed in 2001 or 2 for my licensed psychology. My school psychology was the year following.
And you maintain an active practice in the vicinity of Venice, Florida?
My practice is located in Bradenton, Florida, but I see a lot of individuals from this area.
By this point, you've been practicing in the field of psychology for 20 plus years?
Yes, approximately.
And describe, if you would, your clinical practice.
As part of my practice, I see a lot of children and adolescents for therapy. In addition, I do parent coordination, and I complete social investigations, so I do a lot of evaluations of parents as well.
In this instance, you were retained back in 2016 by the Kowalskis,
Yes,
and they ultimately paid you for those services.
yes.
Do you recall approximately how much you charged for your services during that time?
At that time, my rate was $250 an hour, and for the court appearances and the evaluations, the total fees were between $17,000 and $18,000, I know.
So you were retained by the family to evaluate each of them. From a high level, could you describe your process in reaching these evaluations and opinions?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Do you want me to?
I can break it down.
Okay.
as part of your evaluation, did you receive medical records?
I did.
And did you conduct collateral interviews?
I did.
Can you explain a little bit about what a collateral interview is in your field?
In this particular case, I had asked the parents to provide me names of individuals that I could speak with to get to know the family better. For the children, teachers would be considered a collateral interview, so I spoke with the classroom teachers. Some of them I did written interviews. I had them fill out information on the parents.
You spoke with physicians that had treated Maya.
I did.
You spoke with friends and family.
I did.
You spoke with neighbors, teachers.
Yes.
These were all collateral interviews that were part of these evaluations.
Yes.
And then further ahead of reaching your opinion for each of them, you conducted a one-on-one interview with the subject, whether that was Maya or Beata, or Kyle or Jack.
I did, and I do not have my records in front of me. They're with me, and I can get them out if I need to.
Sure.
But I do know that I met with the parents on multiple occasions. Kyle, I believe that it was one occasion, but I would need to look at the chart. But Maya, I know that my evaluation was completed with her at one occasion because it was at the courthouse. It's the time I met with her to do it.
All right. Your Honor, Trial Exhibit 2006 has already been admitted into evidence. May we publish for the jury?
You may.
All right. This is your psychological evaluation for Maya Kowalski, is it not?
It is.
And just looking at the header, the subject was Maya Kowalski, and it says contact date January 6th, 2017. Is that the meeting or the evaluation you conducted at the courthouse that you previously mentioned?
It is. It was that date.
All right. And the report was issued February 1st, 2017.
It was.
And by that point, Maya was 11. She turned 10, had her 10th birthday in the hospital, right?
Correct.
All right. If we'll look down towards the bottom of the page, you list all of the medical records and documents that you reviewed. For example, the fourth one down, you reviewed the records from Dr. Wassenaar, who the jury heard from this morning.
I was not aware the jury heard from him this morning, but I did review records from his office. Some were provided to me, and some I requested. My office requested directly from him.
All right. And turning to the next page, you reviewed and received the neuropsychological evaluation of Maya Kowalski dated October 20th, 2016. This is the third entry on the page.
Yes, and I believe that was completed by Dr. Lewis, I believe.
Dr. James Lewis?
I believe that was his first name. I don't have it in front of me, but it sounds familiar.
You also reviewed psychiatry and psychology notes from Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, did you not?
I did.
And if we look down, approximately 8 or 9 down, you see a psychiatry consult signed by Mark Cavett, MD. Do you know Mark Cavett to be a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital?
Yes, he's been there many years.
You also reviewed approximately 20 entries down Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital's records for the period October 7th through November 10th, 2016. And then importantly, 3 from the bottom, you reviewed all of the inpatient psychiatry, psychology, and physiatry notes from Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
I did, if it's listed.
All right. Turning to page 4, and that list continues through page 3, now to page 4. You reviewed, among the items you reviewed were a photo of Maya Kowalski at Tampa's Lowry Park Zoo. You see that?
Yes. I actually recall that picture.
All right, if we could publish for the jury 2530-045, previously admitted into evidence.
You may.
And this photograph, do you see the date?
It is dated June 21st, 2016.
And so this would have been approximately 2.5 months before her admission in October to Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital.
Yes, if that's correct.
It looks like,
Mr. Whitney, can you hold on one second? Let me try to cycle the presentation system.
yes, sir.
Okay, there you go.
And not sure if you can tell, is that a walker or a wheelchair behind her? But she appears to be standing, does she not?
She is, and I cannot identify, and I do not recall what was behind her, what I was told, but she appears to be standing.
All right. Back, if you could turn back to page 4 of the report. You also reviewed and you were aware that she was being followed and counseled at Eagle Wings Counseling Center. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you have any knowledge or know by reputation the counselors and psychologists at Eagle's Wings?
Through the years, I've had an opportunity to interact and consult with several of the therapists there, and I was familiar with specifically one of them, and I believe that may have been the first case that I got to know one of the 2 therapists that were working with her.
Do you remember either of their names at the moment?
Lauren Mock is the one that I've had the most experience in working with. And unfortunately, I think maybe it was Rebecca, but I don't remember the last name without looking at my notes. I have them here if you need me to look them.
Turning to the bottom of the page, clinical interview, is that referencing the one-on-one interview with whoever the subject was, whether that was Maya or Kyle?
Yes.
All right. And then teacher interview, the jury's already heard from Ms. Dietert, and then the other gifted teacher was Diana Shepler. You interviewed both of them?
Yes, I actually had a written interview, which is listed as the teacher questionnaire, and then I had a verbal interview as well.
And then last on this page, you not only did you review the psychology and psychiatry records at Johns Hopkins, you conducted an interview with Jennifer Katzenstein at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, correct?
I did, and I spoke with her a couple of times in the process.
All right, turning to page 5, the jury will have this for review during deliberations, but I'm gonna focus on some of the more pertinent entries. I'm looking at, after background information here, 3 paragraphs down, the last sentence, you say, as a result of the lack of a coherent approach, it appears that she received little to no medical treatment while hospital administrators and DCF insisted her condition was psychological. Do you see that, Dr. Duncan?
I did make that statement.
Would you explain a little bit about what you meant by the lack of a coherent approach at the hospital?
Based on the information that I reviewed, I never was provided any type of treatment plan or a multidisciplinary treatment plan. I know that Dr. Katzenstein references that in her notes and the therapy notes. I didn't ever review any type of treatment plan, even for therapy. In fact, during the course that she saw her, I was able to review the notes provided to me, which would have been every contact or attempted contact with Maya, so I reviewed those as part of the process as well.
And in reviewing Dr. Katzenstein's notes and the limited notes of Dr. Cavett, did you come to learn approximately how many hours of cognitive behavioral therapy they provided to Maya Kowalski during this 3+ month span? My
understanding is Dr. Cavett did an assessment on her based on the records I reviewed. There were 2 contacts, I believe, that he had with a family, but he evaluated Maya in one of them. And then following with Dr. Katzenstein, she did an intake with Maya's parents and Maya in October. And then based on the treatment records that I received, they have to document the minutes of therapy sessions. It's pretty standard in the field, even for outpatient therapy. And it was approximately 3 hours of individual therapy provided to Maya during the course of from October to when she was discharged, based on the notes I received.
So there, just to clarify, there have been representations that what Maya was in need of during this time was cognitive behavioral therapy. And your testimony is that over 3.5 months, the hospital provided her approximately 3 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes, after the initial intake with her and the parents, based on the records reviewed.
If we could, and Your Honor, Joint Exhibit 1001 is in evidence. It's the Johns Hopkins medical record. If we could publish for the jury page 3824 from that exhibit.
You may.
If you would focus, so before you zoom in, I'm sorry. Dr. Duncan, do you recognize this as the psychology progress note of Dr. Katzenstein at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, signed on October 14, 2016?
I do. Thank you for enlarging that.
Actually, if you go down below the solid line there, it tells you the date of the record. Okay, at the bottom of the screen there, this is a note from October 13th, 2016, correct?
It is.
All right, and if you'll focus on the last paragraph there on the bottom of the page, it begins, I spent a significant amount of time in conversation today. If you'll just read that briefly to yourself. Did you become aware during the course of your evaluation that there was a back and forth, if you will, over Maya's hospital homebound services, and that had caused her some stress?
I was aware of that.
And zooming out for a second again, this begins, I spent a significant amount of time in conversation today with Maya's parents. I want to give the jury a picture of when you testified to 4 hours of treatment. I believe you draw that from the visit information above. It says type of visit, length of visit. Is that where you're drawing that from?
Yes, and Dr. Kassenstein would note, for example, if it was very brief, she might put 1 minute, she might put 25 minutes. In this case, it was 60. She even documented if she went to the room to provide services, and for example, in some of those, Maya was not in the room, so she would, document the services weren't provided. On one occasion, her father was there. She noted that, but there weren't services provided, so she would put 0 minutes.
So in the tabulation that you did of 4 hours of therapy over 3.5 months, you included the 60 minutes, which included apparently a lengthy conversation with Maya's parents. Is that right?
I did.
All right, we'll turn back again to Dr. Duncan's evaluation of Maya Kowalski, page 5. Go down a little bit further, please. And the last paragraph, last sentence of paragraph 4 here, it begins, however, prior to Maya being removed from the home, there was no evidence that Maya's mother, Beata, had ever suffered from mental health problems. Do you see that, Dr. Duncan?
I do now. So I'm triple. Okay, it's highlighted. Thank you.
We'll try to catch up on the highlighting. In stating that, you had reviewed the counseling records from Eagles Wings and the other providers?
I had, in fact, after Maya was diagnosed, it's not uncommon, like in her case, she sought out therapy and learning to develop some coping strategies to deal with that stressor, and that was in the notes that I reviewed.
But in your review of those records from outside providers, you never saw a mental health diagnosis of Beata Kowalski?
No, not that I can recall. Beyond the one I said that she saw a therapist, but it was noted for her having stress related to her daughter's illness.
Thank you. Turning down to the footnote here, we referenced Dr. James Lewis before, and the footnote 3 says that Dr. Lewis suggested that variability in Maya's composite scores on the assessment may be indicative of psychomotor slowing secondary to central nervous system depressant side effects. This evaluator would suggest that there are many possible, and if we can turn to the next page, and continue with the footnote, many possible explanations for variability in the composite scores. Dr. Lewis's hypothesis can neither be supported nor ruled out without baseline data and further retesting. It remains an unproven hypothesis. First question. Please explain a little bit about the importance of baseline data.
In this particular case, Maya had some significant differences across her scores, and we know that statistically that's pretty unusual, but it does occur. In fact, the manual will go through and tell us the likelihood that occurs. The problem that I saw with the hypothesis was he was linking this discrepancy between scores to medication that maybe she had been prescribed in the past, and there was no prior testing that we do not know. There was some other reason that she may have had the scores. She may have been born that way, her brain working that way. For example, if somebody had head trauma or you had seizure disorder or different neurological conditions can impact, your cognitive functioning. And so he did use the word likely. I testified to this in another hearing that in this particular case, I think even if Dr. Lewis was here, he would use the word likely because there was no data previously to, prior to the medication being administered.
In reviewing Dr. Lewis's report, had he made any statements about whether Maya had been administered medications near the time of this assessment that he performed?
I recall reviewing that that day he made a comment that she was not on any medication, but there was an indication in the records that prior to that she had been on some. I don't have his report.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
If we could pull up Joint Exhibit 1046, which is Dr. Lewis's report. May we publish for the jury, Your Honor? It's been admitted.
You may.
All right, so here we have Dr. Lewis's report, neuropsychological evaluation dated October 20th, 2016. This is 13 days into Maya's hospitalization at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. Focusing on page 5, if we could. Third paragraph from the bottom, if we could highlight that. Dr. Lewis there discusses the selection of a pediatric neurologist is crucial. What was your finding regarding Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital's involvement of a pediatric neurologist?
None of the information that I ever received or reviewed indicated that the consult, the neurological consult that he recommended was followed up on. In addition, I assume that Dr. Lewis didn't have this information, but Maya actually had been evaluated by a neurologist that was on her insurance panel as well. He was referencing some of the fee-for-service, I believe, providers that she had seen in this report.
So Maya Kowalski had seen pediatric neurologists prior to admission to Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
I know that at least one, because I reviewed the records recently and I recall.
And so to the extent that Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital claimed or claims not to have had a pediatric neurologist on staff to conduct this evaluation, there was at least one in Maya's history that could help.
Objection, Your Honor. Overruled.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. We already established you were aware that there was at least one pediatric neurologist that had seen Maya Kowalski before her admission.
Yes.
So my question is, to the extent that Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital claimed or claims that they were unable to follow up on this recommendation by Dr. Lewis because they did not have a pediatric neurologist on staff, they could have reached out to her existing pediatric neurologist.
I object on the leading and the argumentative nature of the question.
Overruled. You can answer.
I had the information, so I have no reason to believe that they didn't have the same information the families had indicated to me they provided.
All right, if we could turn to page 8 of his report, please. And let's turn to why that was so crucial for Maya Kowalski were 4 paragraphs from the bottom. It begins with the diagnosis of factitious disorder by proxy is a working diagnosis, but this needs to be confirmed by a pediatric neurologist who would work with the attending and consulting all children's medical staff to definitively rule out whether this child actually ever had RSD or CRPS. And from your review of the records, that never happened.
That never happened based on a review of the records that was provided.
Now turning back to Dr. Lewis's hypothesis about the evidence of psychomotor slowing in Maya Kowalski and his statement that she was not on any medications at the time of her evaluation on October 20th, 2016. Let's put up Exhibit 1001, page 429 to begin. And at the bottom of the page, below the solid line, you see this is a progress note from October 17th, 2016. Do you see that?
I'm sorry, what am I looking for?
Just looking for the date.
Oh, I see the date, yes.
All right. And if we'll turn to page 431, the note continues. And page 431. It lists her active medications. If we could zoom in on her active medications.
I can see them. I mean,
All right,
it's
you can
not
see
print,
them
but
on-
I can read them.
Great. His evaluation occurred on October 18th, 2016. On the October 17th, 2016, if you look at that list of medications, do you see any medications on there that would have the effect, a cognitive effect or a psychomotor slowing effect?
I really can't answer that question because I'm not a medical doctor. That's something I would consult with a medical doctor who's prescribing to inquire about those medications.
All right, you'll defer to the medical doctors on the effect of those medications.
Yes, yes.
Understood. We can take that down and turn back to trial exhibit, Maya's report, trial exhibit 2006. Page 6, please. All right, so in the top paragraph there, you're, in the middle of the paragraph, you're recapping Dr. Lewis's report here, and you wrote he suggested a working diagnosis of factitious disorder by proxy, but said that this needs to be confirmed by a pediatric neurologist. This is what we just discussed, right?
Yes,
And it never happened.
not to my knowledge.
And then he also recommended that Maya should begin individual trauma therapy. 3 lines from the bottom of that paragraph. Do you see that?
Yes,
Did you see any indication in the records that Maya was ever provided individual trauma therapy?
not based on the psychotherapy and psychological progress notes that I was provided. It didn't reference, it was trauma therapy.
Okay. Turning to findings and impressions below, you wrote JHATCH, which is an acronym for Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, correct?
Yes,
All right. Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital would not permit professionals without staff privileges to meet and evaluate Maya on JHATCH premises. Would you explain a little bit about your collateral interview with Maya Kowalski versus your evaluation at the courthouse and why those accommodations or arrangements were necessary?
sure. Initially, I was asked to evaluate the parents and Kyle. There was some disagreement, was my understanding, on whether Maya would be having additional evaluation beyond Dr. Lewis's evaluation. And so as part of the process, I asked about speaking with Maya to interview her. It wasn't to evaluate her, but just to gather information about her family, her parents, because I was evaluating them and her brother. So I contacted the hospital, staff at the hospital. I do not have staff privileges at All Children's Hospital. I'm not on staff. And I inquired about making arrangements to go up to meet with Maya. And the person that I spoke with let the hospital know that I would be, coming up to expect me. And I believe it was on a Saturday morning. I drove up And when I met with Maya, she was initially in the rec center, and so they did offer to try to find us a room, but there were these long corridors where no one was really present, and they were having some difficulty locating a room. So I met with her in this corridor. I mean, there was privacy, and so I met with her to interview her there. And as I previously testified, that was not an evaluation of her. Subsequently, later.
Let me stop you there, if I could. She's in the rec room. You walk down the hallway with her. What stands out to you about the interaction that you had with her in the hallway as you're conducting this interview?
Certainly one of the things is her condition. You know, during the time she was in a wheelchair, and so I helped wheel her out. And I was, I believe I was sitting on a bench. It may have been a chair, but my back was against the wall, and she was adjacent to me. The way that her feet were turned, I think it would have been impossible, to maintain that posture for a period of time that I met with her. In addition, she was very concerned about people overhearing our conversation, even though the hallway was, I think maybe a couple people walked by, but we would quit talking. It was very isolated. And what else stood out for me about the interview is she told me that she had not been able to speak with anyone privately, and that she wanted to speak with her priest in private and her attorney, and to please get messages to her attorney that she could not have private calls with him.
Now, turning to that versus the courthouse, why was it necessary that you evaluate her at the courthouse?
I did not have staff privileges at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, and it's with many hospitals, it takes a while to go through the accreditation process, and they have to have a meeting to approve you. I have been on at other hospitals, I just haven't there. And so, because of their policies, that you, in order to do an evaluation on the premises, you have to be staffed, and this was time sensitive. It was made arrangements for her uncle to pick her up, was my understanding. He's the one that brought her to the courthouse. And the court made arrangements for me to use a private room. It was well ventilated. There were windows, but it was private location. It was the appropriate place to do assessment.
The long and the short of it is that Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital did not grant you emergency privileges so that you could conduct this evaluation in the hospital.
Object to the form, objection on foundation and
Sustained.
Were you allowed to conduct an evaluation of Maya Kowalski in the hospital?
No, because I didn't have staff privileges.
Turning down within this paragraph here, findings and impressions, you wrote she was not observed to move her legs or feet for the duration of the meeting. You described this earlier with her feet turning in, correct?
Yes, this was description that was when I was doing the evaluation at the courthouse, not early on. I saw observed similar
My
behavior
apologies.
at both times.
All right, and then at the courthouse then, the next sentence begins, several small wounds were observed on her face and hands. And then you, Maya denied harming herself and conveying the wounds were lesions. Did you observe these wounds?
I did, and I didn't, these were not visible when I met with her previously when I interviewed her.
Okay. And you described a second ago that because of the staff privileges issue, she had to be transported to the courthouse by her uncle. So the hospital had to discharge her for that purpose. So the next sentence begins, at the onset of the meeting, Maya apologized for her appearance, indicating her hair was messy. And then you wrote, her hair was not noticeably disheveled. However, it did appear that it needed to be washed. Was it your impression that the hospital had not washed her hair recently?
I could back and refer to my notes, but I visibly remember that it looked like it had not been washed in quite some time. There was a noticeable amount of maybe greasiness. I don't know if that's the appropriate term. And she seemed to be embarrassed about her appearance, when she came in. And of course I told her, it was fine. That I just wanted to be comfortable because we were going to talk some. I explained the process that we were going to work on that day.
All right. At the bottom of page 7 of the report, you begin to summarize your clinical interview and sentence completion with Maya. And then we'll turn, it's just a header there on page 7. We'll turn to page 8, which continues with the clinical interview. Second paragraph, you wrote about Maya. She did not express any concerns regarding her parents or the care her parents had provided her. She did say she worries about her brother, as she knows he cries about her health. Do you recall any further detail about those statements?
Those were very similar to the statement she had provided me earlier when I met with her. As a collateral to gather information about her relationships with her parent and brother. Earlier, she didn't express concerns about their treatment of her. She did express concerns about her brother being very upset and concerned about her.
Maya had just turned 11 years old at this time. Did she appear to be bright and a good historian of her medical history?
She had an advanced communicative demeanor for her age, and that was pretty consistent with some comments that Dr. Lewis observed as well in his report.
And so did you feel that what she was relaying to you was accurate to the best of her abilities?
I believe she was being truthful, and in her reports to me, I understood as a child her perceptions might be different than an adult, but again, her communicative demeanor was pretty advanced for her age.
Turning further down the page, fourth full paragraph there. On the right side here, it's split screen now. Next paragraph. Last sentence or two here. Maya offered that she particularly disliked the hospital social worker Catherine Beatty, as she is one of the people that interferes with her ability to communicate with and see others. What additional detail do you recall from your interview with Maya Kowalski on that point?
I know that Maya, her understanding was that I think she saw Miss Beatty as a gatekeeper, and it was unclear to me whether Miss Beatty was following rules that were in place or she was taking it upon herself, or maybe Maya's perceptions were not the same as maybe another observer would be. But she indicated that if she tried to make calls even to her attorney, that she would sit in the room.
Catherine Beatty.
Yes.
We continue, next paragraph. Maya repeatedly expressed significant frustration over professionals not believing that she was physically ill and in constant pain. Now, you had already, by this point, conducted your collateral interview with Dr. Katzenstein, is that true?
By this time, I had spoken with her on 2 occasions.
All right. And you were aware of Dr. Katzenstein's diagnosis?
I recall seeing an initial diagnosis, one of the early...
Let me show it to you.
Okay.
If we could turn to Joint Exhibit 1001, page 3828. This is a continuation of the October 13th progress note from Dr. Katzenstein that we looked at earlier. This is the 60-minute evaluation. And if we look here, page 3828, towards the bottom of the page, there's kind of a white space there. There's a break. And then it says diagnosis. Would you read that diagnosis to the jury, please? And if you can, explain a little bit about that diagnosis.
It's psychological factors affecting other medical conditions. F54, which is the coding for it, says severe, as there is a close association between her significant stress, anxiety, and exacerbation of pain. And so I will note that this was only early notes, and I did not see it in later ones. And Dr. Katzenstein did not reference this diagnosis when I spoke with her at a later date, but on this particular date where that diagnosis is present, which is consistent with, she told me she believed the child had some medical conditions, but there was a psychological component to the illness as well. So for example, A lot of times, for example, if people are diagnosed with cancer, they may have a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety might impact their ability to adhere to treatment. And so in this case, she saw her as having some type of medical condition. She said that to me when I spoke with her. Like me, she is, not qualified to make a medical diagnosis. We rely on the other professionals that have that training to do so. But she did recognize that she would benefit from therapy to help learn to manage some of her stress. And that's a lot of the notes were focused on anxiety management, I noticed, in use of cognitive behavioral therapy.
So this diagnosis, psychological factors affecting other medical conditions, am I correct that this is psychological manifestations, symptoms overlaid on top of a legitimate medical condition?
I think that that's a fair summary of what she was suggesting
All right.
with this diagnosis.
And on one occasion or more than one occasion, Dr. Katzenstein expressed to you that she believed Maya had a physical condition.
She did. She never referenced this diagnosis to me. I spoke with her after she had seen her 8 or 9 occasions, and the date that I spoke with her, the notes, I have from her, what she reported to me verbally, matched the medical records that she provided me. And at that point, again, she didn't mention a specific diagnosis, but she was concerned about her mental health, and she was concerned about the child expressing that she was stressed and feeling isolated because she was not able to see and spend time with the people that she wanted to.
All right, if we could turn for a second to 10,001-3817. It's another progress note from Jennifer Katzenstein, dated October 19th, 2016, so about a week later. And if you'll highlight the interval history, all of the following, the 3 paragraphs there. And in the first paragraph, I want to focus on Maya was relating in the middle of the paragraph to Dr. Katzenstein that the physical therapy, especially the physical therapy at TGH, was the worst thing for her RSD. Did Maya explain that to you?
She did not speak of TGH a whole lot with me. She spoke more of the therapy at Johns Hopkins All Children Hospital.
And she also discussed here hyperbaric oxygen therapy and Maya's thoughts that it had been helpful.
Yes.
And then, second to last paragraph there, when asked to define her pain, Maya stated that she has pain all over and it is really bad. Subjective reports of pain, how do you treat those in your practice? If a patient reports pain to you, especially a pediatric patient, a child, do you take that at face value, or how do you account for that?
Objection, Your Honor. Foundation and the witness's training and experience is not a medical.
Overruled. You can answer.
I believe one of the reasons that Dr. Katzenstein was employing cognitive behavioral therapy is because Maya did believe whether she was experiencing, not her perception is her reality, that she was experiencing significant pain. And that's why if you look at the psychological progress notes for the therapy, she focused a lot on cognitive behavioral therapy. She used some patient education, and she used some biofeedback based on her notes.
In the last sentence there of that second to last paragraph, she described her parents as her main form of coping, and that she stated she would eat more if they were here. She asked me if she could send her parents a letter, which I deferred to the medical team. In your conversations with Dr. Katzenstein, did she ever explain to you why she needed to consult with the medical team before allowing Maya to communicate with her parents?
No, that topic never came up.
All right, we can turn back now to the report of Maya Kowalski, Exhibit 2006, and we're back at page 8. And the last paragraph there begins, Maya repeatedly expressed significant frustration over professionals not believing that she was physically ill and in constant pain. Well, Dr. Katzenstein believed she was in pain, but apparently some of the other professionals did not.
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative
don't know if I can recall it perfectly, but I'll just re-ask it.
Thank you.
This statement, Maya repeatedly expressed significant frustration over professionals not believing that she was physically ill and in constant pain. Was that a reference to the professionals at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital?
It was when she spoke with me.
All right. Moving down in the middle of the paragraph, she expressed frustration over physical and occupational therapy at JHATCH. She stated that they were the worst. She stated that therapy has exhausted her and the pain is worse after participation in them. Any further detail that you recall?
That's generally a summary of what she shared with me, and as I mentioned earlier, I think that that's one of the things Dr. Katzenstein was trying to work with her when those brief meetings she had with her is compliance, to get her to comply with some of the therapies. In fact, they initiated like a behavior chart with some incentives in place to try to get Maya to be motivated to do those, even though they were uncomfortable for her.
All right. Turning to page 9, first paragraph. That's Maya. She conveyed that she liked the therapist, Rebecca Johnson, she was seeing prior to her admission to JHATCH. Rebecca Johnson, from your knowledge, is with Eagle Wings?
She is. That's the individual. I could not recall her name. And I will say that I know when she first started working with Maya, she worked with Lauren Mock. I think she was finishing up her licensure requirements. But I do know at the time, like in December, she was fully licensed because there was some discussion, or in January, about her continuing to be able to see her, because one of the concerns was making sure somebody was qualified given some of the concerns about diagnosis.
Do you recall, in your review of the records of Eagle Wings and Rebecca Johnson, the frequency with which Maya was attending therapy?
Based on the reports obtained from Eagle's Wings and also the family and Maya, she was seeing her on a consistent basis, like weekly.
And that would be more appropriate than 3 or 4 hours over 3.5 months?
Based on what I know about this child, I was shocked when I learned the little psychotherapy she was given, particularly since a lot of people were attributing her issues to psychological issues rather than medical and maybe psychological.
And it looks like on the third paragraph, one of your exercises was a sentence completion exercise. Would you explain the usefulness of this in a psychological evaluation?
Sure. Often and you can do this with adults, I tend to use it more with adolescents and children, it's considered a subjective psychological measure, which means that you can't derive a score for it. I like to tell individuals that often you look for themes and to see if they're consistent with things maybe the child or the adolescent. Could be an adult if you administer it to an adult or sharing with you, or maybe information that you're getting in other records. And so what happens is I start a sentence and the child completes it. And it can be given one of two ways. Maya is very bright, so I could have had her fill it out. What I ended up doing is reading it to her and filling it out. Just part of that had to do with the time because we were limited in the courtroom. It's not a measure that you follow up and say to the child, why did you answer that way? Again, it's more about looking for things that are consistent with maybe the information in the clinical interview or from other people that may have concerns about the child.
All right, if we could highlight the prompts and the responses here that were conducted. It's the italicized text there. So you would prompt her, for example, you would say, most of all I want, and then Maya would respond?
Yes, she'd say to go home.
All right, and you would prompt her, turning the second to last line, my mother won't.
Second line here.
Second to last line.
Oh, second to let's see.
So,
My mother won't. Like I said, my mother won't, and she responded, hurt me.
all right, and then the last one, mother and I.
That would have been the prompt, and she responded, we like swimming, shopping, and hanging out. We like everything. Sorry, that wasn't highlighted. That was part of it.
Next page is page 10 of your report. Now, if you can just back up for page 9 for a second. This is page 10 is a continuation of the bottom there, which is an interview with Rebecca Johnson. That's the counselor at Eagles Wings, right?
Yes.
And in the middle of that top paragraph on page 10, Rebecca Johnson reported to you that from November 2015 to October of 2016, she saw a significant improvement in Maya's mood. Do you recall that?
Yes, that was in my notes from speaking with her. I don't recall her saying that, but it's in my notes that she said that.
And she also believed that Maya's parents played a large part in Maya's progress.
Yes.
Now we get to your interview with Dr. Katzenstein at the hospital. It begins discussing that she had seen Maya for individual therapy sessions while Maya was at JHatch, and that she had hoped to see her weekly, but sometimes she was not able to see her on a weekly basis. So this gets to the 3 hours of therapy over the 3.5 months.
Yes.
And then below in that paragraph, she stated that she believed that Maya was physically ill, confirming that earlier diagnosis.
Yes. Sorry, I wasn't sure what you're referring to for a second.
Sure. You conducted next an interview with Dr. Ashraf Hanna, one of Maya's pain management physicians. And how did he describe Maya's parents?
He used the word amazing parents, which is why I put in quotes, as well as loving and caring.
All right, next you did a clinical interview with Dr. Anthony Kirkpatrick, her treating physician that provided the first ketamine infusions. And he confirmed that he has diagnosed Maya with CRPS. Is that true?
He did. He confirmed that to me.
And at the bottom there, he said that the doctors at Johns Hopkins have failed to consult with him. Is that correct?
That was my understanding from my communications with him.
Turning to page 11. You conducted a clinical interview with Pradeep Chopra, a pain specialist in Rhode Island and Brown University, correct?
I didn't conduct an interview. I actually, after I had met with Maya before this report was issued, she actually was evaluated by him early on when I first met with the family. I'd ran across an article on Dr. Chopra because he works a lot, my understanding is, with children with pain, and the article was on how these children are often misdiagnosed with psychological disorders.
Okay, my mistake. You didn't speak with him directly.
No, I did not. So I got his
You read his
comprehensive evaluation.
All right, so the jury will hear from him at a later time, so we'll go past that. Let's get to your summary and recommendations after you went through this process, clinical interview, all these collateral interviews, review of medical records. I want to focus on the second paragraph in that section and the second part of that paragraph. It begins, or the part I want to focus on begins, this 11-year-old child's mental health condition worsened as she was persistently limited in her contact with her mother, father, and brother, and then persistently treated by hospital staff as if she or her mother were lying about her pain syndrome. Do you recall any specific statements from Maya Kowalski about the hospital telling her she was lying about her pain syndrome?
She communicated. I'm sorry.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. It's for purposes of medical diagnosis. It's then existing state of mind.
Okay, we'll rule.
I'm sorry.
You can answer.
Could you repeat the question?
The question is, do you recall what she told you about the hospital staff claiming that Maya and her mother Beata were lying about her pain syndrome?
I object to the compound of the two, in terms of which one.
Overall, she can answer.
She wasn't specific to what hospital staff. She used the term broadly, and again, I can pull out my specific interview notes, but this is a summary of the interview. But she expressed a lot of concern that they were not believing that she had a physical health issue, that it was all psychological.
All right. I'll focus then on your statement here, after Maya was warehoused for nearly 90 days. Now that's your word, warehouse, so I'd like you to explain that word to the jury and why you chose to use that.
Looking back, it's probably a pretty strong statement, but based on all the information that I got, this child, it didn't seem she was getting a lot of mental health treatment. Based on the information, talking to the medical doctors that had previously diagnosed her, I'm not qualified to do that, but said that she had this rare disorder. It seemed that all children's were unwilling to accept some of this information. I know to get Dr. Chopra's evaluation, that the court had to order that for her to be permitted to be able to leave and get that evaluation as a confirmatory, was my understanding. And so she sat there from like October till January. She had very little contact with family and friends. I know early on she even told me she couldn't even see her priest. They would not allow people from her congregation. I have it in, it's discussed in the report that Maya was an active member of her church. In fact, I talk about that some in the evaluation as well.
Let me move on to the next
Okay.
question. That paragraph ends with no less than 3 medical doctors have diagnosed her medical condition. And then I want to juxtapose that to the next paragraph, begins with that the hospital had suggested conversion disorder and that was contraindicated. How does one affect the other? How does the fact that she's been diagnosed by 3 medical doctors with a medical condition affect the diagnosis of conversion disorder?
If you have an identifiable medical condition that is cause and symptomology, you cannot say the symptomology is a conversion disorder if there is a medical diagnosis and medical etiology for it. And so the medical doctors that I spoke with, information I reviewed, indicated that she had this rare disorder. A lot of people aren't familiar with it, but that the symptoms that she was displaying were consistent with a diagnosis of the chronic regional pain syndrome. That's what they shared with them.
All right, and turning to the last page, page 12. This evaluator does not agree that factitious disorder by proxy or conversion disorder are appropriate diagnoses in light of Maya's documented medical conditions. Based upon your background, training, and experience, and to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, is it and was it your opinion that conversion disorder was a misdiagnosis?
It was not an accurate diagnosis based on the information that I was provided by the medical doctors.
And based on what we've discussed here in this report, your background, training, experience, and to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, do you have an opinion whether it was a breach of the standard of care for Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital to provide only 4 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy over the span of 3.5 months?
Objection and approach. Correct.
sure you've forgotten it, so I'll ask it.
I did it very few days,
It
sorry.
was a long question, and it has to be. Do you have an opinion based upon your background, training, experience, and to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty that it was a breach of the standard of care for Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital to only provide approximately 4 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy over the span of 3.5 months?
Yes, based on the information that I'm sorry.
Overruled, you can answer.
Okay. Yeah, yes, based on the information that I reviewed and was provided.
Do you have an opinion, to adopt your term, that warehousing Maya for 3.5 months in this fashion caused or contributed to psychological injury in Maya Kowalski?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled, you can answer.
I don't have any current information on her current psychological functioning, so I can't answer that because I haven't seen Maya since I evaluated her, other than today when, I saw them in the hall.
All right. Let's turn now to, you did a report for each of these family members, and I'll try to speed this up.
Let me, so we're shifting to a different,
We are.
this might be a good time for a break. Okay. Members of the jury, we're gonna take a break. I'm gonna try to keep it 10 minutes, but it could be closer to 15 minutes. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information.
All right, jurors exiting.
Okay, the jury is out of our presence. Everyone be seated. I'm sorry, I just need to go deal with a few things here for the next few minutes. Dr. Duncan, while we're on break, you're not allowed to discuss your case with anybody,
Can I
okay?
just sit here?
You can sit there, you can sit down. If you need to use the restroom, that's fine, but you just can't talk about the substance of your testimony.
Sure, I think I'm just gonna sit here,
Okay.
Your Honor, if that's okay.
Okay, 10 to 15 minutes.